Why the U.S. needs an $11.50 minimum wage. Federal minimum wage must be a suitable minimum wage for the poorest states. It needs to act as a floor from which states can further increase their own minimum wage. Otherwise, we are hurting the economies of states that are already economically disadvantaged, which hurts the entire economy through federal subsidies that support state services. Using the average monthly cost of living index nationwide of $2,240 multiplied by the cost of living index of the poorest state, which would be Mississippi at 83.1, and divided by the full time of 160 hours per month for a federal minimum wage of $11.63. The nationwide average should be around $14 an hour, and each state should adjust their state or city minimum wage based on cost of living. Not raising the minimum wage can lead to economic stagnation, especially adjusted for inflation. For example, the $7.25, the current minimum wage, in $2007 when it was first proposed, and when Congress last raised the minimum wage, is equivalent to $10.22 in 2022. So any proposed minimum wage below $10.22 is ineffective in raising the standards of living for American workers. Based on cost of living, business profitability, and median household income, a minimum wage of $11.50 is necessary to benefit Americans. The reason why American minimum wage might seem lower than other highly developed nations is because America has many rural and agriculture areas which need a lower minimum wage than would be needed in a city. Each state has the right to raise their minimum wage to adjust it to their cost of living and economic output, so this is really not an issue, and it's more a reflection of the differences between U.S. states. If you were to look at European economies, you wouldn't expect a nation like France to have the same minimum wage as a nation such as Romania. Same way, you wouldn't expect each individual U.S. state to have the same minimum wage, but the federal minimum wage must be the minimum for the poorest of states. Now, there's also a difference in taxation and government services. Even though the U.S. is the wealthiest nation on earth, we do not need to have the highest minimum wage because we have lower taxes and less public services than other nations, and thus we need a minimum wage that can cover housing and taxes for our current scenario and shouldn't change it based on the economies of nations that are very different than the United States. Furthermore, the United States needs to have consistently mandated increases for the minimum wage so that it doesn't fall out with inflation. The current minimum wage was first proposed around 15 years ago and came into effect 13 years ago in 2009. And obviously, a lot has changed economically since then, so that is the main reason why the current minimum wage is ineffective for paying for modern cost of living and inflation. I believe that the minimum wage should be changed on a yearly or bi-yearly census with congressional approval, of course, and that this bill would gain bipartisan support as it raises the minimum wage for millions of Americans across the nation, but does not increase it to inflated levels of $15 an hour supported by Biden and many Democrat congressmen. I don't necessarily blame people who support a $15 minimum wage because most who do are supporting it in states where a $15 minimum wage is effective and are just not accounting for what the minimum wage needs to be for states that are not as city-based and would benefit from a lower minimum wage. And again, overall, let's review the points. The minimum wage should be $11.50 based on the cost of living index for the lowest cost of living states in the Union. Secondly, it does not need to account for the economic activities of other nations, as why would it? Every nation is unique and should have their own minimum wage based on their own factors. And thirdly, it should have yearly or bi-yearly changes so that it can stay accounted for with inflation. And I would even propose that the minimum wage increase faster than inflation to encourage companies to hire more people to work now rather than saving money for a day when minimum wage will be comparatively lower, as that should never happen. Thank you. Now allow me to review the U.S. minimum wage 2022 by state cost of living map. As you can see, there are only 3 states that would benefit from a minimum wage below $12 an hour, and all of those states would benefit from a minimum wage of $11.50 an hour, those being Mississippi, Oklahoma, and Kansas. Furthermore, you can see that a lot of the Midwest and South do not benefit from a minimum wage of $15 or higher, and the only states that benefit from a minimum wage of $15 an hour are along the East Coast, the West Coast, Alaska, and Hawaii, due to their higher cost of living in general. Obviously, these are full state averages, and these states likely should have a lower minimum wage to account for some of their more rural areas, but a state such as Massachusetts, which is very highly densely populated, might not have to have a minimum wage below $50, and a $15 minimum wage may actually be beneficial in such states. So it's not that a $15 minimum wage is ineffective overall, it's just not effective for the nation as a whole, and really is only useful for the Northeast, West Coast, and Alaska and Hawaii are states where high cost of living makes a minimum wage $15 an hour higher necessary to provide a cost of living that is adequate to the minimum wage workers of those states. Thank you for making it to the end of this video. I would just like to ask everyone to like and subscribe and leave a comment if you enjoyed the video. I'd also like to cite my sources. I got the cost of living index from the Missouri Economic Research and Information Center and the average U.S. cost of living from numbeo.com. Thank you.